international accounting standards. Okay, so you go to China and somebody gives you a set of financial statements. Do you understand them?
No.
Because they're Chinese, right? No, because well, assuming they're translated, the problem is, what are the underlying principles under which that, those statements have been prepared, right? And so the point becomes, when we look at numbers, do we know how they are derived? Do we know what they mean? And what we call GAAP in this country isn't necessarily the same GAAP everywhere. And one of the areas of concern is revenue recognition. So when do we recognize revenue versus when other people recognize revenue, right? If you sell a software license and you're Microsoft, is that revenue or is it not revenue? If you're a Parachi or a par development company and you take a deposit, have you sold something or not? When do we recognize revenue? When do we have a sale, right? And we'll talk about that in this class. But in general, what's hot is, how do we recognize revenue? How do we recognize revenue? Not only in real estate, okay? Brazilian federal police alleged bribery scandal at the Finance Ministry's Tax Appeal Board. So, just my only international comment, be careful. There's enough opportunities in this country with real estate. Just, if you go into any other country, with your eyes wide open, okay? Japanese tax system revisions include the cutting of the effective corporate tax rate. One of the arguments that have been made in this country regarding, incentive for business to grow is the significantly large corporate tax rate that we have in this country. And, I learned a long time ago, there's a guy, I was working in Spain, and people from Kellogg was one of my clients. The guys from Kellogg came, Director of Taxation, International Taxation came. I'm having breakfast with these guys. So I'm a young guy, and he says to me, I don't know what he said to me, and I said, no, but I don't mind. I mean, companies should pay their fair, share of taxes. And he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, companies don't pay taxes. People pay taxes. Companies don't pay taxes because the tax rate at a company level is pushed down to customers in the way of prices. Ultimately, there is an expectation after tax of what companies are looking to make. And in fact, I forget the exact numbers. I'll bring that in one of these days because I know I have it. But what percentage of the tax receipts in this country come from individual taxes versus from corporate taxes? Does anybody know? Does anybody know? Does anybody have a guess? 60 what? 60-40 which way? I think it's something like 70% are individual taxes. Okay, and that's on the federal income side. Okay, if you then throw in all the state, and you throw in personal property taxes, sales taxes, utility and franchise, it's huge. So at the end of the day, the tax burden. So that guy's comment was also very relevant in the sense that individuals really pay the tax, right? And so, let's not get into economics and and all that. So, another issue that's important. Greek law targets corporate profit shifting. You don't see that in real estate, but transfer pricing issues are huge considerations for tax authorities throughout the world, right? And you see it here all the time, right? You hear all this talk about, well, Apple's got all this cash outside the country. The issue isn't the cash. The issue is that the profits have been kept outside the country. And so companies are always trying to figure out the best way to what they call transfer pricing. How do we transfer goods from one tax jurisdiction to another to minimize the impact, okay? Something that's important. Don't have time to go over in detail. The Marlin Hotel sells for $9.5 million. There's 14 rooms. That's $678,000 a room. It sounds very high to me. I don't know anything about hotels, but that sounds very, very high to me. And they're going to operate it as a hotel. So it's not redevelopment. It's one of these little Art Deco things on the beach somewhere. Marlin Hotel, Miami Herald, Wednesday of this week. Here, another one of these. Okay, Ventus. Ventus is a big sort of healthcare REE. They are acquiring the hospital chain Ardent, and then they're spinning off the hotel operations. So basically, a hotel called, or hotel system, hospital system called Ardent is selling its real estate to Ventus is the best way to say it, you know, and then they're going to have their operating company elsewhere. So another one of these is sort of the REIT owns real estate, operating company goes a different way. Single borrower CMBSs get more aggressive. You know, you're asking questions. In general, credit has definitely loosened up from what the last couple of years, you know, or from a couple of years ago. I'll skip through all of it. Retail vacancies improve. Retail vacancies improve. Older Americans prefer to age in place. I thought that was an interesting one, because like old people don't ever want to move out of their house, right? And they don't want anybody to help them and all that, but there's a whole, do we have any senior housing people here? You do senior housing? Cool.
And I think I read one article with the baby boomers, the new baby boomers, will move the market because the people from the north came to the south, and it's different like in past decades because they don't have a lot of money to buy big houses. And middle prices communities for adult people is moving on a lot. If you check in the MLS, it's pending sale, pending sale, pending sale, pending sale, because it's cheap. You have a good house in a cheap price and you can live in a good style.
Maybe I should start thinking about it. I don't know.
No, it's an article that...
No, I believe you. I
read
believe you.
yeah.
I believe you. Maybe I know, but you know.
It's not my, that I think only, I checked it before, but I read this article and I started to rethink that it's true, because the new baby boomers that I am, can accumulate a lot of money in that decades, that in the 60s, for example.
I think there are also, and again, I don't know how much they play into this or not, but there are paradigm changes in
Exactly.
fewer children, right? People that are much more mobile, people that don't have family around to take care of them, so they may be forced into, you know, these type communities as well.
Yeah.
Skip some of this. Yeah, this is the China one. India wants to move closer to international financial reporting. The problem is like if you go to UK or Canada, you can feel pretty comfortable that those financial statements mean something to you. If you go to India or like Pakistan, you really don't understand. I don't understand what those financial statements necessarily mean, okay? So you just gotta, you know, eyes wide open, okay?
Don't go that far. Colombia. Colombia
Listen.
is shifting to the gap this year. And yeah, this year, at the end of the year, they have to move completely to gap. But 2 years ago, I was reading my balance sheets and I need 2 translators. And I end up hiring Deloitte.
Well, no, I mean, listen, that's part of why we set up a due diligence practice for Latin America for Ernst & Young was all the capital going in and people couldn't understand, you know, what the statements were. There are a lot of fundamental, I mean, a lot of these countries, Colombia isn't one of them, but Mexico, for example, for a lot of years had hyperinflationary economies. And so what happens is people locally tried to find solutions to financial statements that didn't make any sense. So they would every year adjust or revalue fixed assets, for example, you know, and so, you know, different things, you know, dictated people doing things in different ways. And then you come in from the outside and you go, what does this mean? Yes?
Yes. I grew up in a country with inflation and depreciation all the time. Big companies use GAAP, but small companies use the local. And I understand perfectly, it's very clear, and we need to adjust the asset all the time because it's the currency change.
Right.
And I had one experience many years ago about the translation. I wanted to explain what was the translation, what the different value of the currency. And here couldn't understand the people. And we could, because all my undergrad, I studied this.
Yeah, I haven't. The one advantage I would tell you is I say advantage. I haven't done foreign currency translations in a long time because in real estate, in this country up to now, you haven't seen a lot of investment
Yeah.
outside. In operating businesses, it's something you deal with every day. And then you get into issues of, I mean, and again, I'm not up to date on currency translations. You get into, do you translate at historical rates? And there used to be different, different mechanisms that you would use. Historical rates for fixed assets, for non-monetary assets, and then current rates or average rates for monetary assets that would reflect the transactions in a particular period. We're not going to touch any of that in this class, okay?
Oh, yeah,
So we're not,
it's very
thankfully,
difficult to understand.
thankfully, Target. So I didn't know Target like Target. Apparently, Target is apparently getting out of Canada. I guess they weren't successful. I didn't read that. But so Target used Canada's Creditor Arrangement Act, which is their federal bankruptcy law, to get out of their leases. And why do I bring this up? Because like now there's all sorts of concern in Canada as to how a company was able to annul or violate or get rid of all of these leases using the bankruptcy laws. And why do I bring that up? A lot of companies in this country, retailers in particular, have no choice but to go into bankruptcy court in order to get rid of leases. And that's just something as a landlord you should know, is you think leases, yeah, they're hard-clad, long-term, good contracts, valid, but they can be invalidated or thrown out in bankruptcy court, okay? Just to be aware of that. I will not spend any time on this, but I am going to mention it. Another one of the things I have to read every week is the economy. Yes, Justin?
So what do you think about Burger King switching fully into Canada? So,
What do I think about it?
yeah, in regards to that.
Well, look, I'm a free market guy, okay? At the end of the day, what's that guy, Larry Kudlow, who used to be, free market capitalism is the best way to a prosperous economy. I'm not an economist. The problem is are true international laws and tax treaties, fair and equivalent? I don't think that in general, my understanding is that there are any issues with Canada, okay? But what does trouble me, so do I have a problem with that company doing what's legal? No, absolutely not. I mean, we've had several companies that have gone to Bermuda. The thing that you need to be concerned about as a resident of this country is are the business conditions and the climate that much more favorable in another country that they would want to move corporate headquarters elsewhere? And if they are, what are we doing about it to stay competitive, right? Nothing in the world is static. Everything changes. So you're changing, people around you are changing, right? People are always trying, everybody's been for business. Everybody wants to put food on their table, okay? So if what Burger King does in buying Tim Hortons and the whole reverse, merger and all that, is to get themselves into a more favorable tax environment, listen, it's legal, go do it. Am I happy as a resident of South Florida that a company that was founded here decides to move? No. Am I troubled as a citizen of this country that our tax structure is not competitive versus our next door neighbor? Of course I am. Now, do I think we have people in Washington that understand it or are going to do anything about it on either side of the aisle? No. Am I comfortable that either in the executive or the legislative branch that we have people that are competent enough to do it? No. And so you hear a lot of talk, you hear a lot of rhetoric, but you don't see any action. And unfortunately, there's nobody that's really competent to deal with that right now. There isn't the political will to do anything. Yeah. Okay. So listen, The Economist, great newspaper. So you may not like it. It can be critical of this country at times, but what is it? Hold your friends close and your enemies closer, right? It's important to look at the world from other people's eyes. And so I read La Vanguardia from Barcelona every day. I pop around. Lately, I've been looking at El Clarín. I'll look at in Venezuela now. You got to look at websites. You can't look at press. So you got to look at blogs and so. But I try to read from different parts of the world to see what's going on. Okay, The Economist is a great world newspaper. Does have very much European English view. The lead story this week, the lead editorial and the lead story deal with what they call space and the city. I'm not going to go through it because I don't know that I totally agree with it. You know, it starts very interesting. It says buy land, or Mark Twain said buy land, they're not making any more of it, right? And their whole argument goes, it talks about a lot of issues that you should be concerned about in some of the other classes that you have in this program, land planning, etc. But ultimately they deal with the high cost of land in the urban centers. So ultimately, and I show something in my capital markets class. We don't have a scarcity of land in this country or in any other country. What we have is a scarcity of land in the urban centers where people have gone. And I highly recommend that you go to the website and read the article and talk about the whole history of how we've gone from farming to urban, right? So from rural to urban economies, we have now, and because of the pressures that urban economies put, right? So here's a classic example. I live in Key Biscayne, right? Key Biscayne was incorporated as a municipality 21 years ago. We're part of Dade County, but Dade County approved a couple of large developments. And people said, hey, we don't want all these people living here. You know, forget this. So we couldn't change what happened, but we incorporated. Ultimately, why? To control our destiny, right? Initiatives you've seen here in Florida to limit development, right? Haven't passed. So there's always the pressure of the people that have the land to have as much space around them. The whole premise of the article and the editorial in The Economist is by having greater density, we would bring down the value or the cost of land and ultimately have a much healthier and vibrant economic result. Because real estate wouldn't be as dear, there'd be more development, there'd be more activity, right? There'd be more, movement of capital. And ultimately, economies move because of the velocity of money. So the more that you can generate, their particular estimate, and again, they're economists, they assume everything, right? But basically they're saying in America you could raise GDP between 6.5% to as much as 13.5%, or in trillions of dollars, you're talking to anywhere from $1 to $3 trillion. So I highlighted a bunch of stuff, but I've taken way too long on it. I recommend you read it because I think it definitely will question some of the underlying principles that we have and how we think, at least individually, about zoning rights and densities and green space and green belts and all these other things that we sort of value as a society.
What was the name of the article?
Well, it's just in this week's Economist. It's called Space and the City, or the Paradox of Soil. Okay, but again, it's not a cheap. I'm not going to require it for this class, but it's a great. I've been reading it for 20-something years. It's a great weekly summary. FinFacts. I don't know how I got this, but George Smith's Partners is a mortgage broker out in California. They send a weekly newsletter. What's interesting about it is, they just put sort of baseline rates. They talk about some of the deals that they're doing, right? So I'll just leave with this. Where are 10-year treasuries today? Where are 10-year treasuries today?
2.25.
2.25. You've been in this program how long? 2.25. I ask that question every class. Do I ask that question every class? Why do I ask that question every class? What is the 10-year treasury? Is that not the baseline benchmark interest rate for the real estate industry? We need to know that. If we don't know that, how can we make a transaction? How can we make a transaction? We don't know where baseline interest rates are. Got a lot to learn. So we could say it's like 1.9 something, call it 2%. Okay? Is that good or bad? I don't know. Doesn't matter. But it's 2%. And that's what we need to know. Okay? Because everything starts from there. From there up. Cost of capital goes up from there. Expected returns need to go up from there. Okay? And we'll talk about that in the capital markets class. But we need to know where the baseline interest rates are. Okay?
What was the name of that article? Or that
This
publication?
no. So there's a thing called a business called George Smith Partners. They send a newsletter out every week called FinFacts, FINFACTS. And what they do is they just put some of the top baseline interest rates. More than that, what's interesting in it, they always put 3 or 4 typical transactions that they've closed on, terms, you know,
Right.
and so that's what's important to read, to see what's happening in the capital markets, okay? The other one is, for people that are interested in Florida, and we should be interested in Florida because that's what we live, and development is a local business more than anything else, is Florida Trend. Florida Trend's a great magazine. I also recommend it. You get it for $12 a year. It's $1 a month. It's a great publication. But you can sign up to their email blasts. You get a morning and an afternoon, and it just summarizes information from throughout the state, from different newspapers or other, sources in the state. I will break for lunch with the following 2 things. Okay, another one of the smart quotes for the day was from the Dalai Lama. It says, "The purpose of our lives is to be happy." The purpose of our lives is to be happy. Okay, and in this one I found, I sent some reflections out the other day that I'd written at a retreat I'd gone to some years ago, and it was from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it says that, "Remember that we were placed on this planet for one reason and one reason only, and that was to acquire a love of learning, right, and to learn to love." So acquire a love of learning and to learn to love. Okay, all right. So why don't we get back together at 1:30?
That was very
You're
peaceful.
free to go. I just, wanted to sort of, set you